Crag's skull muncher bit through the spine of the armored human and felt nothing. That was the part that made the rage bubble up behind his eyes, somewhere deep in the thick bone of his skull where thoughts weren't supposed to live. The crunch should have been good. The spray of red should have made him laugh, made his boys nearby roar with approval, made the whole battlefield light up with the joy of proper fighting. But the taste of iron in his mouth was just wet, just warm, just another thing that happened because things kept happening and wouldn't stop. He threw the body aside and looked for the next one. There was always a next one. That was the problem. That was the thing that had started growing in his head like a tumor made of questions spreading roots through meat that had never needed to think before. Crag had been fighting for what the Humies called centuries. He knew this because he had crushed enough of their data slates and screaming administrators to learn their counting words to understand that they measured time in ways that made his skull ache. Centuries, decades, years. Little words for something that felt like a river that wouldn't stop flowing, that kept pushing him forward through blood and fire and screaming and the endless thunder of guns that all sounded the same now. His power claw caught a tank round and deflected it into a mob of his own boys. 3 of them exploded into green paste. Good deaths, funny deaths even. Crag waited for the laugh to come up from his belly the way it always had, the way it was supposed to, and instead there was just the hollow thud of his heart and the distant awareness that 3 more boys would grow from the spores and learn to fight and die in the same way, in the same places, forever. Forever. That was the word that had broken something inside him. He had first heard it from a Humie priest, a black-robed screamer who had been trying to burn his boys with promethium and prayers. Crag had caught the priest by the throat and squeezed until the eyes bulged and the prayers became gurgles, and in those final moments the dying man had laughed and said something that lodged in Crag's brain like a bullet that wouldn't come out. "You'll fight forever," the priest had choked through crushed windpipe and blood foam, "and it will never mean anything. The Emperor protects, but you, beast, you are trapped in a war that cannot end. Cannot end." Then the priest had died with a smile, and Crag had thrown the body aside and kept fighting because that was what you did, that was all there was. But the word stayed. Forever. It sat in his skull and started asking questions that orcs weren't built to ask. The battle around him continued in its familiar rhythm. His boys, thousands of them, crashed against the Humie lines like green waves against grey cliffs. Daka chattered in every direction. The ground shook with the footsteps of his gargant, the massive walking fortress called the Big Problem that had taken 17 years and 4 different mechs to build. Somewhere to his left, a squad of the Humie's best warriors were making a last stand around their banner, golden and ragged and meaning something to them that Crag couldn't understand. He should lead the charge. He should be first into their guns, first to feel the bite of their blades, first to prove that he was the biggest and the strongest, and the most worthy of leading the war. Instead, he stood in the middle of the carnage and watched. The watching was new. The watching was wrong. Orcs didn't watch, they did. They charged and bellowed and lived in the pure present moment of violence, and that was supposed to be enough. But Crag found himself seeing patterns now. The way the Humies always tried to protect their officers, the way his boys always rushed the biggest thing on the battlefield regardless of tactical sense, the way the same scenes played out across different worlds, different enemies, different colors of sky, until they all blurred into one endless battle that had no beginning and no end. His biggest knob, a hulking green mountain called Gutrippa, came charging up with gore dripping from his power claw and a grin splitting his face. "Boss, dey got a big fortress over dat hill, full of dem silver Humies with de skull faces. Can we smash it, can we?" Crag looked at Gutrippa's eager, stupid eyes, so simple, so pure. Gutrippa didn't have the thinking sickness. Gutrippa just wanted to fight, and the fighting was good, and when the fighting was done there would be more fighting, and that was the whole world, the whole universe, the whole point of everything. "Yeah," Crag said, and his voice sounded strange to him. "Tired. Go smash it." Gutrippa whooped and charged away, gathering boys as he went. Crag watched them go, a green tide of joy and murder, and he felt the emptiness spreading through his chest like cold water filling a hollow shell. He had been like that once. He remembered being like that. The memories were from before the priest's words, before the thinking started, and they felt like they belonged to someone else. The skull-faced Humies died like all the others. Their fortress burned. Crag walked through the aftermath and stepped over corpses that his boys were already looting, fighting each other for the shiniest bits of salvage, and he found himself stopping at a wall covered in Humie writing. He couldn't read it, but one of his captured runts could, a trembling Gretchen that the boys kept alive because it was useful for translating and could be kicked when someone needed entertainment. Crag grabbed the runt by its neck and held it up to the wall. "What's it say?" The Gretchen's eyes bulged with terror. Its legs kicked uselessly. It's a record, boss. A record of all the Humies what died here. Names and dates and how they died. How many? The Gretchen scanned the wall, its lips moving. Thousands, boss. Maybe tens of thousands. Going back. Hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. This fortress had been here, filled with Humies, for hundreds of years. And there had been Orks fighting them the whole time. Different Orks, different warbosses, different campaigns with different names, but the same war. The same endless cycle of green flesh against armored walls, of bullets and blades and bellowing fury, playing out over and over while the stars wheeled overhead, and nothing changed. Crag dropped the Gretchen. It scurried away, squealing. He stared at the wall of names and felt something cracking inside his skull. Some fundamental pillar that held up the whole structure of what it meant to be an Ork. The names went on and on, flowing down the wall in neat columns, each one representing a Humie who had lived and fought and died believing their death meant something. And behind each Humie death, invisible but implied, were the Ork deaths. His people, his kind, dying and being reborn from spores, fighting and dying again forever. Forever. He put his power claw through the wall, shattering stone and names into dust, and the destruction meant nothing. There were other walls, other names, other fortresses on other worlds, endless monuments to endless war, and smashing one was like spitting into an ocean. The war swallowed everything. The war continued regardless of what anyone did or didn't do, regardless of victory or defeat, regardless of who lived or died. The war was not a thing you won. The war was a thing that consumed you while pretending to give you purpose. His weird boy found him standing in the rubble, staring at nothing. Snickwort was ancient by Ork standards, twisted and glowing with barely contained psychic energy that made the air taste like copper and lightning. The other boys avoided him. Even Crag usually avoided him because weird boys were dangerous and unpredictable and sometimes exploded for no reason. But Snickwort had been with the War longer than anyone, had survived through 3 different war bosses before Crag killed his way to the top, and he saw things that other Orks couldn't see. "The boss is thinking again," Snickwort said, and his voice was a wet whisper, like something was living in his throat and speaking for him. "Snickwort can smell it. The thinking, it's getting stronger. Go away, can't." The thinking calls to Snickwort. "It's like a beacon, boss, like a big shiny light in the dark, except the light hurts and the dark is what we supposed to be." The weird boy crept closer, his staff crackling with eldritch energy. "Snickwort knows what's happening to you. Snickwort's seen it before." That made Crag turn, his eyes, deep red and ringed with old scars, fixed on the weird boy with sudden intensity. "You've seen this before? Other bosses with our thinking? Not bosses." Snickwort's face twisted into something that might have been a smile if smiles were supposed to be sad. "Weird boys. We all get it eventually, if we don't explode first. The power opens up your skull, lets in all DA stuff that's supposed to stay outside. The questions. DA understanding. We see too much and then we can't stop seeing, and then," he shrugged, "then we're broken. Can't fight proper no more. Can't enjoy nothing. Just trapped in dar thinking forever." Is that what's happening to me? Maybe. Maybe something worse. Snickwort leaned on his staff, ancient bones creaking. "You're the boss, see? The biggest and the strongest. The whole War believes in you, follows you, pours all their faith and fury into you like filling up a barrel. And all that belief, all that energy, it's supposed to make you stronger, more brutal. more cunning. But maybe, sometimes, if the barrel gets too full, it starts to overflow. Starts to make you more than just an orc. I don't want to be more. No, none of us do. Snickwert's eyes, milky and wrong, stared through Crag into something beyond. But the universe don't care what we want, boss. It just keeps turning, and we keep fighting, and the war keeps going. And eventually some of us start to see the truth behind all the noise. What truth? The weird boy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. That it's all a trap. The fighting, the war, the whole thing. We're bugs in a jar, boss. The universe made us to fight, gave us the joy of fighting so we'd never stop, and then it sits back and watches us bash each other forever while nothing changes and nothing matters, and da jar just fills up UIV blood dat nobody ever cleans out. Crag's power claw opened and closed reflexively, servos whining. Part of him wanted to crush the weird boy, to silence these terrible words before they could take deeper root in his skull. But another part, the growing part, the thinking part, knew that killing Snickwert wouldn't kill the truth he was speaking. How do you live with it? Crag asked. Day, thinking, how do you keep going? Snickwert laughed, a broken sound like grinding gears. I don't, boss, not really. Every day I wake up and the weight of it all tries to crush me flat. Every battle I'm screaming on the inside even when I'm screaming on the outside. But I keep going because stopping ain't possible. Because even when you know the truth, even when you see the trap, you're still in it, still fighting, still doing what the universe made you to do. The only difference is now you hate it. The weird boy shuffled away, leaving Crag alone in the rubble of the fortress with names still legible in scattered fragments at his feet. Partial Humi words. Partial Humi lives. All of them crushed and forgotten, just like the orcs who had done the crushing would be crushed and forgotten in their turn by some other enemy, some other war, some other pointless iteration of the same eternal conflict. Crag looked up at the sky, grey with smoke from burning wreckage, and he felt the walls of the trap closing in around him. The campaigns continued. They always continued. Crag led his war from world to world, following the psychic pull of conflict that drew orcs. Like moths to flame, he fought through jungle worlds where the trees bled and the ground tried to eat his boys. He fought through ice worlds where the cold killed as many as the enemy did. He fought in the void itself, storming Humi ships that bristled with guns and filled with screaming soldiers who died just as easily as all the others. And through all of it, the thinking grew worse. He started to notice things he had never noticed before. The way his boys never questioned anything, never hesitated, never wondered why they were fighting or what would happen when the fighting was done. They were pure in a way that Crag could no longer be. They lived in an eternal present moment of violence and joy, and he envied them so deeply that it became a physical ache in his massive chest. He noticed the way victory felt hollow now. Each fortress breached, each army destroyed, each world claimed should have filled him with savage triumph. Instead, he felt only the exhausted certainty that another fortress was waiting, another army was forming, another world was preparing for the next inevitable war. The cycle was endless, the cycle was everything, and he was trapped inside it, spinning like a gear in a machine too vast to comprehend. His boys started to sense something was wrong with him. They didn't have the words for it, couldn't articulate what they were feeling, but orcs were sensitive to the psychic currents of their warbosses. Crag's doubt was leaking out of him like blood from an untreated wound, contaminating the fierce certainty that held a war together. His knobs began to challenge him more often. His mechs argued over his orders. The internal violence that was normal for any orc horde started to escalate into something more threatening. Gutripa came to him after a battle that should have been glorious, a head-on charge into a line of Humi tanks that had left the ground carpeted with burning wreckage and green corpses. The big knob's face was clouded with confusion that looked almost painful on features designed for simple brutality. "Boss," Gutripa said, picking his words carefully like they were uncomfortable objects he didn't know how to hold. "The boys are talking. Boys always talk. They're saying you don't want to fight no more. They're saying you stand around watching when you should be crumping. Dare saying maybe you're too old now, too tired, maybe need a new boss. Crag turned slowly, his shadow falling over Gutrippa like a mountain's shadow falling over a hill. Even diminished by doubt, even hollowed out by the thinking sickness, Crag was still the biggest orc in the war by far. His scars told stories of 1,000 victories. His power claw had ended more lives than most orcs could count. You want to try it? Crag asked. You want to be the new boss? Gutrippa's tiny eyes flickered with calculation. For a moment, just a moment, Crag saw something there that might have been ambition, the natural orc impulse to rise, to dominate, to prove superiority through violence. Then it faded, replaced by something like fear. Nah, boss. Ain't saying I want it. Just saying what the boys are saying. Den tell the boys to shut up and fight. That's what they are for. That's what we're all for. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. He watched Gutrippa lumber away to spread the word, and he wondered how long it would be before someone actually challenged him, how long before his doubt became visible enough to make the challenge inevitable. And what would happen then, when some young, hungry knob charged at him with all the certainty and joy that Crag had lost? Would he even fight back? He didn't know, and that not knowing was the most terrifying thing of all. The answer came on a world called something unpronounceable in the Hume tongue, a forge world belching smoke and fire into an orange sky. The factories stretched to every horizon, massive cathedral complexes of industry where slave workers died by the thousands to produce weapons that would kill millions more. It was the kind of target that would have made old Crag's blood sing with anticipation. So much to destroy, so many machines to smash, so many Humes to crush. Now it just looked like another iteration of the same eternal pattern. These factories would burn. The Humes would rebuild. Other orcs would come to burn them again. The cycle would continue long after everyone involved was dead and forgotten. But something different happened on this world. The Humes had brought a new kind of warrior. Crag first saw them when his vanguard charged into what should have been a simple defensive line. Instead of breaking and running, the Hume soldiers held their ground with mechanical precision. Instead of dying messily and satisfyingly, they kept fighting through wounds that should have been fatal, and standing behind them, coordinating everything with clicks and whirs and machine code chatter, were figures that weren't quite Hume at all. They had metal faces and metal bodies and eyes that glowed with cold electric light. They smelled like machine oil and hot circuits, and when they spoke it was in voices that sounded like the noise Crag's own power claw made when its gears ground together. Tech priests, his captive Gretchen explained later. Servants of the machine god, who had replaced their weak flesh with blessed metal in pursuit of some kind of perfection. Crag watched one of them die. His boys finally overwhelmed the defensive line, and one of the metal-faced Humes was dragged down by sheer weight of green bodies. As the choppers rose and fell, the tech priest's voice emerged from the mechanical mess of his throat, and even though Crag couldn't understand the words, he understood the tone. It was peace, acceptance. The tech priest died believing his death served some greater purpose, some cosmic machine that would keep turning regardless of individual parts breaking down. That night, Crag found himself wandering through the captured factory complex, surrounded by the corpses of the day's fighting. His boys were celebrating, fighting each other, already forgetting today's battle in anticipation of tomorrow's. But Crag walked alone through corridors of cold metal and flickering lights, and he found himself standing in a room full of dead servitors. They were everywhere, slumped against walls, collapsed over control stations, piled in corners where the fighting had been thickest, half Hume, half machine things, their faces slack in death, but bearing none of the fear or pain that dying Humes usually showed. They had died performing their functions, pushing buttons and pulling levers until the very moment destruction came, and there was something in their empty eyes that made Crag's massive hearts clench. They hadn't known, hadn't wondered, hadn't questioned what they were doing or why they were doing it or whether it meant anything in the vast, uncaring sweep of the galaxy. They had just been, just done, just performed their programmed functions until the end came, and then they had stopped, as peacefully as machines powering down. Crag stood among them for hours, watching their dead faces, and he felt an envy so vast and terrible that it threatened to swallow him whole. He wanted that emptiness. He wanted that certainty. He wanted to go back to the simple joy of fighting and killing and being the biggest and strongest without ever asking why or what for, or whether any of it mattered. But you couldn't unknow something once you knew it. You couldn't unsee the patterns once you'd seen them. The thinking sickness didn't go backward. Snickwort found him there, as Snickwort always found him during these dark moments. "The boss is looking for answers in dead faces," the weird boy observed, settling his twisted frame against a control console. Snickwort used to do that too. Spent years staring at corpses, trying to understand why they got to peace and we don't. Did you find an answer? Lots of answers, none of them good. Snickwort's milky eyes reflected the flickering emergency lights. Da humies believe in something bigger than themselves. They call it Da Emperor, or Da Machine God, or whatever they need to call it to get through another day. That belief lets them die peaceful, because they think they are going somewhere, becoming something, serving a purpose that continues after they stop. And us, we don't got that, we just got DA fighting. DA fighting is the purpose for most of us. But you've broken through, boss. You've seen behind the curtain. And now you know what Snickwort's known for longer than I can count. DA fighting ain't a purpose, it's just what we do because we don't know how to do anything else. There's no end to it, no point, no reward, just endless war until DA stars burn out and everything goes quiet. So what do? Snickwort laughed his grinding, broken laugh. We keep fighting, boss. What else is there? The universe made us for war. Even knowing it's pointless, even hating every second of it, we can't stop. Our bodies won't let us. Our minds won't let us. Even standing here having this conversation, part of you is already planning our next attack, already itching to charge into our next battle, already screaming for blood, even though another part of you knows it don't mean nothing. Crag's power claw opened and closed. He could feel the truth of what Snickwort was saying in the tension of his muscles, the constant low-level aggression that pulsed through his blood like a second heartbeat. Even now, even in the depths of his existential despair, some primal part of him was calculating attack angles on the weird boy, measuring threat levels, preparing for violence that might never come. He was trapped, not just in the war, but in himself. His own biology was a prison designed to keep him fighting forever, and the lock was on the inside where no power claw could reach it. The war fractured 2 weeks later. It started with a knob named Gorgot One Eye, a rising power who had been gathering followers among the younger, hungrier orcs. He challenged Crag in front of the whole horde, ritual combat for leadership, and Crag accepted because refusing would have shown weakness that would invite even more challenges. They fought in a circle of screaming, cheering boys, under an alien sky on a world whose name Crag had already forgotten. Gorgot was fast and vicious, his massive chopper scoring hits that would have killed a lesser orc 3 times over. Old Crag, the Crag from before, would have met that fury with equal fury, would have overwhelmed his challenger through sheer savage joy of combat. This Crag fought mechanically, efficiently. He blocked and countered and exploited openings without any of the passion that was supposed to fuel orc warfare. And in the end, when Gorgot lay broken and bleeding in the dust with Crag's power claw raised for the killing blow, something strange happened. Crag hesitated. He looked down at Gorgot's defiant face, at the certainty in the dying knob's eyes, and he saw himself as he used to be, a creature of pure purpose, a weapon that didn't ask questions, a part of the eternal war that never wondered why. The hesitation lasted only a moment, but in that moment, the watching boys saw something they should never have seen. They saw doubt, they saw weakness, they saw a warboss who had lost the essential fire that made him worthy of leadership. Crag brought the claw down and ended Gorgot, but the damage was done. The warg didn't fall apart all at once. These things never did. But Crag could feel it fracturing around him, loyalty eroding like stone under acid rain. More challenges came, and he defeated them all. But each victory was hollow and mechanical, and each victory showed the boys more clearly that their warboss was broken inside. Snickwort came to him on the night before the final battle, the one that would determine whether the war survived or shattered into 1,000 warring fragments. "They're going to kill you tomorrow, boss. All the knobs who been waiting, they've made a deal. Gonna swarm you together, pull you down like dogs on a squig. Then they'll fight each other for da scraps." Crag was sitting on a pile of scrap metal looking up at unfamiliar stars. "I know. You could run. Take what boys are still loyal, fight your way out, start over somewhere else. Run to what? Another war? Another endless war? Another few decades of fighting until the thinking gets too bad and another bunch of knobs pulls me down?" Crag shook his massive head. "There's no running from this. There's no escape. The whole galaxy is the jar and we're all bugs inside it. Then what's the plan?" Crag was quiet for a long time. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, the same stars that had watched 1 billion wars exactly like this one play out across 1 million worlds. He thought about the Hume priest whose words had started all this, dying with a smile because he thought his emperor would remember him. He thought about the tech priests with their machine faces, finding peace in servitude to patterns they couldn't see. He thought about his boys, simple and joyful, doing exactly what they were made to do without ever wondering if there might be something else. "The plan," he said finally, "is to fight. Because that's all there is. Because even knowing it's pointless, even hating it, even wanting to stop more than I've ever wanted anything, I can't. The war is what I am, the war is what we all are, and maybe that's the worst part, Snickwort. Not that the war never ends, but that we don't want it to. Not really. Not down in the part of us that's older than thinking. We love it even while it's killing us. We need it even while we know it means nothing." He stood, his ancient armor creaking, his power claw humming with barely contained energy. "So tomorrow I'm gonna fight, and maybe they'll kill me, and maybe I'll kill enough of them to hold on for another few years, but either way, the war goes on. It always goes on. That's the only thing that's certain in this whole stinking universe." The dawn came grey and bloody, like all dawns do on worlds where orcs have been fighting. The disloyal knobs had gathered their forces, a green tide of ambition and violence ready to tear down the warboss who had shown weakness. Crag stood alone on a rise of blasted earth, watching them come, and he felt the familiar fire rising in his blood despite everything. It didn't matter that he knew the truth now. It didn't matter that he could see the trap, could trace the endless cycle stretching backward and forward through time like a snake eating its own tail. His body was singing for war, his power claw was aching to rend and tear, and somewhere in the depths of his massive skull, the old savage joy was stirring despite the weight of understanding pressing down on it. Maybe that was the cruelest joke of all. That knowledge changed nothing, that seeing the bars of your cage didn't make them any less solid, that even a warboss who understood the futility of eternal war couldn't stop being what he was, couldn't stop wanting the very thing that was destroying him. They came in a roaring wave, dozens of knobs leading hundreds of boys, all of them hungry for his death, all of them burning with the pure certainty that he had lost. Crag watched them come, and he laughed. The sound surprised him. It wasn't the hollow, bitter laugh of understanding. It was the old laugh, the simple laugh, the laugh of an orc facing a good fight. Because this was different, wasn't it? This wasn't fighting nameless enemies for forgotten reasons across identical battlefields. This was fighting for himself, against his own kind, with nothing at stake except his continued existence. There was no grand purpose here, no delusional belief in progress or meaning. Just survival. Just the raw animal struggle that predated all philosophy. He charged. The impact was everything he remembered. Everything the thinking had been slowly draining from him. Bodies crunching, blades biting, the spray of blood catching the grey morning light. For a few perfect moments, Crag was what he used to be, what he was built to be, nothing but violence and motion and the joy of destruction. Grocker and Skullbust and Nazgrab and a dozen others whose names he had never bothered to learn came at him in waves. His power claw sang through flesh and bone. His massive boot crushed skulls. His teeth found throats and tore them out with ancient instinctual savagery. He was the biggest, he was the strongest, he was the war boss. But they kept coming. They always kept coming. That was the trap, wasn't it? The war never ended because the enemies never ended, whether those enemies wore human uniforms or had green skin and familiar faces. The cycle was eternal, and no amount of killing would ever break it. A chopper found his side, biting deep between armor plates. A power claw raked across his back, tearing muscle down to bone. He kept fighting. Another blade, another wound. He kept fighting. Blood was running down his legs now, pooling in his boots, but his arms kept swinging, his body kept moving, because stopping wasn't possible. Stopping wasn't in his nature. He killed Krog with his dying Nob's own chopper. He crushed Grimgit's skull between his hands. He felt his ribs cave in from a warbike collision, felt his left eye burst from a point-blank slugger shot, felt his power claw seize and spark from damage that couldn't be repaired mid-battle. The world was narrowing, shrinking, becoming just the next enemy and the next swing and the next breath that might be his last. And through it all, the thinking wouldn't stop. This was it. This was the answer to the question he had been asking ever since that Hume priest smiled while dying. The war never ended because orcs never let it end. Because every orc, even one who saw the truth, would rather die fighting than live in peace. Because the joy of violence was hardwired into their bones, into their blood, into whatever passed for orc souls. They were weapons that had achieved sentience, and weapons existed to be used, even if the using was meaningless, especially if the using was meaningless. Crag's legs gave out. He crashed to his knees in a pool of blood that was mostly his own, surrounded by the bodies of the nobs he had killed, and the boys who were already fighting over the right to deliver the killing blow. His power claw hung useless at his side, severed cables sparking. His vision was grey at the edges and getting greyer, but he was laughing, still laughing, because he finally understood. The war never ending wasn't the tragedy. The tragedy was that they loved it anyway, that he loved it anyway, even now, even dying, even knowing that his death would change nothing and his replacement would fight the same wars in the same ways for the same empty reasons, until some future warboss caught the thinking sickness and asked the same unanswerable questions. The cycle was perfect in its cruelty. The trap was perfect in its design. You couldn't escape because you didn't want to escape, not really, not in the part of you that mattered. You fought because fighting was better than not fighting, even when you knew it was pointless, even when the knowledge was tearing you apart from the inside. A young nob, name unknown, face forgettable, raised a massive chopper over Crag's bowed head. The other contenders had been pushed back momentarily by this one's ferocity. First blood, first kill, first claim to leadership. The tradition was older than any of them. Crag looked up at his killer and saw his own reflection. The same hungry eyes, the same simple certainty, the same joy at the prospect of violence that Crag had felt before the thinking started, before the questions, before the terrible clarity that had ruined everything and nothing. This one would lead the war, would fight new wars on new worlds, would crush enemies and claim victories, and maybe, someday, start asking questions that had no answers. Or maybe not. Maybe this one would stay simple and pure until something killed him, would never know the burden that Crag was finally about to put down. Lucky bastard. The chopper fell. Crag caught it. His ruined hand, the one without the power claw, closed around the blade's edge and held it 6 inches from his skull. Blood poured from his palm where the edge bit deep, but his grip didn't waver. The young nob's eyes went wide with shock. Old instinct, old refusal. Even knowing everything he knew, even wanting it to end, his body wouldn't let him give up. His nature wouldn't let him accept death without a fight. The curse was that complete. With his last surge of strength, Crag stood, blood spraying, bones grinding, organs failing, but standing. The young nob tried to pull his chopper free and couldn't, tried to let go and found Crag's other hand closing around his throat. Somewhere in the gathering crowd, someone started to cheer. The sound spread because that was what orcs did when they saw something properly violent and brutal. They cheered, they approved, they fed the cycle that would consume them all. Crag crushed the young nob's throat, let the body fall, stood swaying in the morning light, surrounded by corpses and cheering boys, and raised his ruined arms in a gesture of triumph that meant nothing and everything. He was still the warboss. The war would continue. The thinking would continue. The suffering would continue. The only answer to the question of what happens when an Ork realizes the war will never end is that the Ork keeps fighting anyway, because that's what Orks do, because that's all anything does in the end. The war eats you whether you understand it or not. The only difference is that understanding makes every bite hurt a little more. Crag turned to face his battered, cheering War. Behind him, the sun rose on another battlefield. Ahead of him, endless more battlefields waited. The universe was vast and hostile and completely indifferent to his pain. He opened his bloody mouth. He bellowed the war cry. And somewhere deep in his skull, in the part where the thinking lived, something that might have been tears or might have been blood ran down where no one could see.